Hello, and welcome to this session on rejection of innate ideas. In this unit, we will mainly focus on John Locke's arguments against the rationalist position of innate epistemic principles, which is found in his work, An Essay Concerning Human Understanding. Locke, at the outset, adopts a computational approach, rejecting the materialist and the theological. His concern is with the original, certainty, and extent of human knowledge, together with the grounds and degrees of belief, opinion, and assent. By knowledge, he means the ability to know, the faculty of gathering and utilizing information. To understand its extent is significant because it leads men to realize what they cannot know, and thus to sit down in a quiet ignorance of those things which, upon examination, are found to be beyond the reach of our capacities. More generally, we should entertain all objects in that way and proportion that they are suited to our faculties. Holding out the hope that we will learn the proper use of our limited capacities, and specifically human faculties, by seeing to what things they are adapted, Locke is looking for what might call the computational specifications, the design of the human mind. The arguments against innate ideas. Situating himself against the rationalists, Locke begins by challenging the established opinion among some men that there are in the understanding certain innate principles. Based on a model of the understanding as a set of proportions present to the consciousness, consisting in impressions on an unstructured substrate, he demonstrates convincingly there are no innate ideas present from birth. The assumption of cognitive transparency. Cognition, in Locke's view, consists in ideas, by which is meant nothing but the immediate objects of our minds in thinking. The common sense assumption that consciousness is the mind, that all cognition takes place at the site of phenomenological awareness. True, Locke himself remarks in the opening paragraph, the understanding, like the eye, whilst it makes us see and perceive all other things, takes no notice of itself, and it requires art and pains to set it at a distance and make it its own object. However, the assumption that what is needed is careful introspection remains. The metaphor of the wax tablet. Once cognitive transparency is assumed, the conscious content of the mind becomes a test of innate ideas, for to imprint anything on the mind without the mind's perceiving it seems to me hardly intelligible. In this metaphor, the assumption that the clay itself has no structure is already implied. The search for prior structure limits itself naturally to conscious impressions. The understanding as a set of propositions. In a related move, the understanding is tacitly equated with the conscious product of understanding, knowledge conceived as a set of propositions. This makes the claim of cognitive transparency seem more plausible. It is only common sense to hold that no proposition can be said to be in the mind which it never yet knew, which it was never yet conscious of. If you can die without realizing you know something, this great point will amount to nothing more but only to a very improper way of speaking, which in practice says nothing different from those who deny innate principles. Innate ideas as fully present at birth. The innate ideas Locke argues against are those which the soul receives in its very first being and brings into the world with it. A simple test of the rationalist hypothesis is thus to inquire into the ideas of children and idiots. If it is granted that they have souls, it follows that these should be impressed with innate ideas. Since it is simple to ascertain that children do not have certain ideas, such that the proposition that it is impossible for the same thing to be and not to be, by asking them or by appealing to common knowledge of children, the presence of innate ideas can swiftly be ruled out. Locke's critique of rationalism. Locke's critique of rationalism flows coherently from his underlying assumptions of the understanding as a set of propositions present to consciousness, consisting in impressions on an unstructured substrate. Within this framework, the rationalist claim is that innate ideas are universally present at birth can be rejected as false. It is Locke's assumptions rather than his explicit reasoning that is problematic. These form a cluster. The notion that the understanding is a product rather than a process follows from the common sense assumption of cognitive transparency, since it is precisely the products of cognition rather than its inferential processes that are made available to consciousness. Locke's achievement lies in the computational approach itself. What he establishes is the possibility of thinking about the mind as an information processor. Since the operation of the mind's faculties are typically unavailable to introspection, the assumption of cognitive transparency makes the rationalist position, particularly in Locke's formulation, untenable at the outset. What Locke is unable to get at within the framework of these assumptions is a conception of a specified faculty. It strikes him as self-evident that humans have a general capacity to acquire propositions, but this fact should be clearly distinguished from the claim of innate ideas. The common sense assumptions of cognitive transparency is not challenged until Hume, whose introspective experiments begin to push past the limits of conscious awareness. This simultaneously undermines the notion that the understanding is a product consisting in propositions. Rather, it is a process where the power of making inferences requires an explanation. It is a search for this explanation that leads Immanuel Kant to a formulation of transcendental categories. The innate knowledge thesis. The innate knowledge thesis joins the intuition-deduction thesis in asserting that we have a priori knowledge, but it does not offer intuition and deduction as a source of that knowledge. It takes out a priori knowledge to be part of our rational nature. Experience may trigger our awareness of this knowledge, but it does not provide us with it. The knowledge is already there. Plato presents an early version of the innate knowledge thesis in the Meno as a doctrine of knowledge by recollection. The doctrine is motivated in part by a paradox that arises when we attempt to explain the nature of inquiry. How do we gain knowledge of a theorem in geometry? We inquire into the matter. Yet, knowledge by inquiry seems impossible. We either already know the theorem at the start of our investigation or we do not. If we already have the knowledge, there is no place for inquiry. If we lack the knowledge, we don't know what we are seeking and cannot recognize it when we find it. Either way, we cannot gain knowledge of the theorem by inquiry. Yet, we do know some theorems. The doctrine of knowledge by recollection offers a solution. When we inquire into the truth of a theorem, we both do and do not already know it. We have knowledge in the form of a memory gained from our soul's knowledge of the theorem prior to its union with our body. We lack knowledge in that, in our soul's unification with the body, it has forgotten the knowledge and now needs to recollect it. In learning the theorem, we are, in effect, recalling what we already know. Plato famously illustrates the doctrine with an exchange between Socrates and a young slave, in which Socrates guides the slave from ignorance to mathematical knowledge. The slave's experience, in the form of Socrates' question and illustrations, are the occasion for his recollection of what he learned previously. Plato's metaphysics provides additional support for the innate knowledge thesis. Since our knowledge is of abstract, eternal forms, which clearly lie beyond our sensory experience, it is a priori. Contemporary supporters of Plato's position are scarce. the initial paradox, which Plato describes as a trick argument, rings sophistically. The metaphysical assumptions in the solution need justification. The solution does not answer the basic question: just how did the slave's soul learn the theorem? The intuition deduction thesis offers an equally, if not more, plausible account of how the slave gains knowledge a priori. Nonetheless, Plato's position illustrates the kind of reasoning that has caused many philosophers to adopt some form of the innate knowledge thesis. We are confident that we know certain propositions about the external world, but there seems to be no adequate explanation of how we gain this knowledge short of saying that it is innate. Its content is beyond what we directly gain in experience, as well as what we can gain by performing mental operations on what experience provides. It does not seem to be based on an intuition or deduction. That it is innate in us appears to be the best explanation. Empiricists and some rationalists attack the innate knowledge thesis in two main ways. First, they offer accounts of how sense experience or intuition and deduction provide the knowledge that is claimed to be innate. Second, they directly criticize the innate knowledge thesis itself. The classic statement of this second line of attack is presented in Locke in 1690. Locke raises the issue of just what innate knowledge is. Particular instances of knowledge are supposed to be in our minds as part of our rational makeup. But how are they in our minds? If the implication is that we all consciously have this knowledge, it is plainly false. Propositions often gives us examples of innate knowledge, even such plausible candidates as the principle that the same thing cannot both be and not be are not consciously accepted by children and those with severe cognitive limitations. If the point of calling such principles innate is not to imply that they are or have been consciously accepted by all rational beings, then it is hard to see what the point is. No proposition can be said to be in the mind, which it never yet knew, which it never yet was conscious of. Proponents of innate knowledge might respond that some knowledge is innate in that we have the capacity to have it. That claim, while true, is of little interest, however. If the capacity of knowing be the natural impression contended for, all the truths a man ever comes to know will, by this account, be every one of them innate. And this great point will amount to no more but only an improper way of speaking, which, whilst it pretends to assert the contrary, says nothing different from those who deny innate principles. For nobody, I think, ever denied that the mind was capable of knowing several truths. Locke thus challenges defenders of the innate knowledge thesis to present an account of innate knowledge that allows their position to be both true and interesting. A narrow interpretation of innateness faces counterexamples of rational individuals who do not meet its conditions. A generous interpretation implies that all our knowledge, even that clearly provided by experience, is innate. Defenders of innate knowledge takes up Locke's challenge. Lib Nights responds by appealing to an account of innateness in terms of natural potential to avoid Locke's dilemma. While one form of nativism claims that knowledge is innate in the sense of being present as such from birth, it might also be maintained that knowledge is innate in the sense of being innately determined to make its appearance at some stage in childhood. This latter thesis is surely the most plausible version of nativism. Carruthers claims that our innate knowledge is determined through evolutionary selection. Evolution has resulted in our being determined to know certain things, like principles of folk psychology, at particular stages of our life as part of our natural development. Experiences provide the occasion for our consciously believing the known propositions, but not the basis of our knowledge of them. Carruthers thus has a ready reply to Locke's counterexamples of children and cognitively limited persons who do not believe propositions claim to be instances of innate knowledge. The former have not yet reached the proper stage of development. The latter are persons in whom natural development has broken down. According to ReliableISM, beliefs are warranted if they are formed by a process that generally produces true beliefs rather than false ones. The true beliefs that constitute our innate knowledge are warranted then because they are formed as a result of a reliable belief-forming process. Carruthers maintains that innate beliefs will count as known provided that the process through which they come to be innate is a reliable one. He argues that natural selection results in the formation of some beliefs and is a truth-reliable process. Empiricism and innate ideas. The empiricism-rationalism distinction is still often characterized, at least in part, in terms of the rejection or endorsement of innate ideas. Empiricists like Locke, Berkeley, and Hume are said to deny that we have innate ideas, whereas rationalists are said to have endorsed innatism. Empiricists are also said to have rejected and rationalists to have endorsed substantive a priori truths. Is it reasonable to distinguish early modern empiricists from early modern rationalists on the basis of their attitude towards innate ideas? Here are 5 reasons to doubt that this is reasonable. Spinoza. As Louis Loeb noted, Spinoza is completely silent on the subject of innateness. He never claimed that we have innate ideas. However, he famously denied that mind and body interact. This may be taken to imply that our ideas, rather than deriving from sense experience, are innate. Berkeley. In his most famous writings, Berkeley did not claim that all of our ideas have sensory origin, nor did he reject innate ideas. He only rejected abstract ideas, but the greatest difficulties for enrolling the empiricist Berkeley among the enemies of innatism come from his personal notes. Not only did he write that Locke was tedious about innate ideas, but he also wrote that they are innate ideas, that is, ideas created with us. Malebranche. The rationalist Malebranche attacked rather than endorsed innate ideas. As Nicholas Joly noted, Malebranche's rejection of innatism derives from his anti-psychologism. Ideas, according to Malebranche, are not in the mind at all. Indeed, they are not the sort of entities which could be in a mind. So, if there are and could be no ideas in a mind at any time, a fortiori, there are no innate ideas. Descartes can reply that ideas are only innate in us in the same sense as that in which we say that generosity is innate in certain families, or that certain diseases such as gout or stones are innate in others. It is not so much that the babies of such families suffer from these diseases in their mother's womb, but simply that they are born with a certain faculty or tendency to contract them. Malebranche rebuts that this form of innatism is trivial and vacuous, saying that our ideas are innate because our mind has a capacity to form or bring them to consciousness under appropriate circumstances, is like saying that we fall asleep because we have a normative virtue. What we need to know are the categorical, non-dispositional properties that ground these dispositions. Lib Nights. Lib Nights was aware of Malebranche's criticism. When he defends the doctrine of innate ideas, most notably in the new essays, he is fighting a battle on 2 fronts. On the one hand, he counters Locke's rejection of innatism in the first book of the essay. On the other hand, he responds to Malebranche because he too endorses the dispositional account of innate ideas attacked by Malebranche. This is how ideas and truths are innate in us, as inclinations, dispositions, tendencies, or natural potentialities, and not as actions. So, the standard account of Lib Nights' innatism as a rationalist reply to Locke's concept empiricism is too simplistic. Lib Nights is opposing the rationalist Malebranche as well as the empiricist Locke. Boyle and the Cimento. Authors like Robert Boyle or the Italian natural philosophers who were associated with the Accademia del Cimento are usually regarded as empiricists. Yet, Boyle mentions inbred notions or endorses innatism in various passages. They mention that God has planted in our soul and that we recollect in the course of experience. Passages like these are hard to reconcile with the tendency to take the endorsement or rejection of innate ideas as a criterion to distinguish between early modern empiricists and rationalists. There is nothing in the mind, Locke wrote, that was not first in sense. This means the mind is a blank tabula rasa upon which is written every experience we have. From our early experience, we begin to learn to abstract the ideas of the experiences. He did not say this, but it stands to reason. The reason all humans can come to the same basic conclusions from same or similar or even dissimilar appearing experiences is because our brains are hardwired to think in the only way the human brain can, with the 256 logic paths built into it, which are described by the 256 syllogisms found in all languages. We are incapable of thinking of a 257th. Watch a human baby. It must put everything in its mouth, including its own toes and fingers, in order to examine them. When it's time to learn to walk, it must first learn to crawl on its belly, and then on its hands and knees, and then stand up on the wobbly legs that animals had on the day one, after which it will fall down over and over again because it must learn to learn from its experiences, to fill its tabula rasa and then to abstract knowledge from those experiences and then apply them to the act of living. Let us now summarize what we have discussed so far. The empiricism-rationalism distinction is broken back. However, if one still wants to use it, one cannot appeal to the endorsement or rejection of innate ideas, as scholars have often done. An appeal to reliabilism or similar causal theory of warrant may be the best way for rationalists to develop the innate knowledge thesis. They have a difficult road to hoe, however. First, such accounts of warrant are themselves quite controversial. Second, rationalists must give an account of innate knowledge that maintains and explains the distinction between innate knowledge and a posteriori knowledge, and it is not clear that they will be able to do so within such an account of warrant. By appealing to reliabilism or some other causal theory of warrant, rationalists may obtain a way to explain how innate knowledge can be warranted. They still need to show how that explanation supports an account of the difference between innate knowledge and a posteriori knowledge. Now you can try to answer the following questions. What are the influences and impact of John Locke in the modern world of thought? Discuss the theoretical contributions of the empiricists. Explain the concept rejection of innate ideas. Who are the empiricists rejecting innate ideas? What are the central themes of empiricist philosophy? Analyze the empiricism-rationalism distinction. Hope that you may go through the reference books for further reading. The Legacy of Logical Positivism, Studies in the Philosophy of Science by Stephen F. Barker and Peter Ackenstein, 1969, published by Johns Hopkins University Press, Baltimore. From Plato to Derrida by Walter Kaufman and E. Forrest Bide in 2008 by Pearson Prentice Hall Publications, New Jersey. The Problem of Empiricism from the Journal of Philosophy by R. Chisholm, 1948. A Treatise of Human Nature by D. Hume, 1975, published by the Oxford University Press, London. From Descartes to Hume, Continental Metaphysics and the Development of Modern Philosophy by E. Louis Loeb, 1981, published by the Cornell University Press, Ithaca. Challenges to Empiricism by H. Morrick, 1980, by Hackett Publishing, Indianapolis. Thank you for watching this program. We can meet again with another topic. Have a nice day.